Welcome friends to this course on understanding episodist drama. We are in week 7 and this is going to be lecture number 3. Today we'll discuss another famous episodist playwright, Tom Stoppard. Tom Stoppard was born in Czechoslovakia to a Jewish family. His family fled to Singapore in 1939 to escape the Nazi invasion of Czechoslovakia. After the Japanese invasion of Singapore, they moved to India, where Stoppard spent his early childhood. His father died during World War II, and his mother later remarried to a British Army officer, Kenneth Stoppard, leading the family to settle in England in 1946. Stoppard's works are celebrated for their intellectual depth, sharp dialogue, and playfulness. He often blends high culture with popular culture, using his plays to question philosophical, scientific, and historical concepts. Stoppard was knighted in 1997 for his services to drama. He is also a recipient of numerous other awards, including Tony Awards, Oliver Awards, and Academy Award. Stoppard remains a towering figure in contemporary theatre and literature, known for his wit, brilliance, and ability to make profound ideas accessible through the medium of drama. Enter a Free Man was the first play that Tom Stoppard composed. This was followed by his breakthrough play titled Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. This play was an intertextual parody of Shakespeare's famous play Hamlet. Stoppard has chosen two minor characters from Shakespeare's play and made them heroes of his play. We'll discuss this play in great detail. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern was followed by another very famous play titled Jumpers. Jumpers follows the story of a man called George who is trying to find out the meaning of life and deals with philosophical questions on the nature of existence. Travesties is a historical drama intermingled with surreal imageries wherein we meet three important historical figures: James Joyce, Tristram Jara, and Lenin, through a historical figure who was a very minor character in the movement of history, Henry Carr. In addition to writing screenplays for films, Stoppard composed several other plays. Arcadia, Rock and Roll are some of his other most important plays. Today, we'll discuss one of his most famous plays, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. As I have already told you, this play was first performed in the year 1966. The play follows the story of two minor characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, from Shakespeare's famous tragedy Hamlet. Both the characters navigate events beyond their understanding. Summoned to spy on Prince Hamlet by Claudius, they engage in humorous philosophical musings about fate and free will. Powerless to alter their destiny, they meet their inevitable deaths, mirroring their roles in Shakespeare's original. The play blends absurdist comedy with existential themes. When the play starts, we meet two Elizabethans, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They are passing time in a place without any visible character. They are well dressed, hats, cloaks, sticks, and all. Each of them has a large leather money bag. Guildenstern's bag is nearly empty. Rosencrantz's bag is nearly full. The reason being, they are betting on the toss of a coin in the following manner. Guildenstern, who will be called Gil in the play, takes a coin out of the bag, spins it, letting it fall. Rosencrantz studies it, announces it as heads, and puts it into his own bag. Then they repeat the process. They have apparently been doing it for some time. The run of heads is impossible. Yet Ross betrays no surprise at all. He feels none. However, he is nice enough to feel a little embarrassed attacking so much money of his friend. Ross says, "We have been spinning coins for as long as I remember." Gil says, "How long is that?" Ross says, "I forget. Mind you, 85 times. Gil says, "Yes." Ross says, "It will take some time beating." The coin toss is symbolic. It represents chance, but streaks of heads approximately more than 90 times, represents that there is some power which is determining their lives. Basically, this tossing of the coin becomes a metaphor of the conflict between fate and free will, which we would discuss in greater detail in the slides to come. Since Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are free, they have to pass their time. For passing their time, they indulge in everyday illogical conversations. Tom Stoppard has used everyday language to speak some profound truths about human life and human existence. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they talk about fingernails, toenails, beards. Conversation about such unimportant and insignificant aspect of human life in a play raises the curiosity of the audience. Ross says another curious scientific phenomenon is the fact that fingernails grow after death, as does the beard. Gill says, what? Ross says, beard. Gill says, but you are not dead. Ross says, I did not say they started to grow after death. The fingernails also grow before birth, though not the beard. Gill says, what? Beard? What is the matter with you? Reflectively, he says, the toenails, on the other hand, never grow at all. Gill asks, the toenails never grow at all? Ross says, do they? It is a funny thing. I cut my fingernails all the time, and every time I think to cut them, they need cutting. Now, for instance, and yet I never, to the best of my knowledge, cut my toenails. They ought to be curled under my feet by now, but it does not happen. I never think about them. Perhaps I cut them absent-mindedly when I am thinking of something else. This conversation about fingernails, toenails, beards is quite ordinary and a marker of everyday banality of human life. Although what they are talking might be scientifically illogical, yet it suggests the circularity of life. It suggests that there is a life before life and there is a life after death. As beards and fingernails continue to grow after death, and therefore they also grow before life. Basically, this conversation alludes to continuity of certain processes even in death, which could be interpreted as a metaphor for the persistence of absurdity or the remnants of life in a meaningless cycle. Rosencrantz' comment about cutting his toenails absent-mindedly raises the idea of unconscious action versus intentionality. Tom Stoppard, through these characters, is trying to suggest whether human beings exist or human beings consciously live. There is a difference between living a life and existing. When one lives one's life, one is conscious that one is living. All his actions are voluntary and intentional. But human beings are often found to be living unconsciously. Like Rosencrantz says, he cuts his fingernails unconsciously. Human beings also do so many things in their lives unconsciously, unintentionally. You could have also marked that their conversation is filled with philosophical humor. Another important feature of the conversation that they have is the use of non sequitur by Tom Stoppard. Non sequiturs are illogical conversations that characters have in many of the absurdist plays. I have already discussed what is non sequitur while discussing the plays of Samuel Beckett. Let us have one example from the play to find out how Tom Stoppard uses non sequiturs. Ross says, whose go? Gill says, why? Ross says, why not? Gill says, what for? Ross says, foul. No synonyms, one all. Gill says, what in God's name is going all? Ross says, foul. No rhetoric, 2-1. What does it all add up to? Can't you guess? Gill, were you addressing me? Is there anyone else? Who? Ross, how would I know? Gill, why do you ask? Ross, are you serious? Gill, was that rhetoric? Ross, no. Gill, statement, 2-all, game point. Ross says, what is the matter with you today? Gill says, when? You must have noticed that the content of this conversation is illogical and irrational. If you try to find out the meaning in this conversation, you are bound to fail. Why? because they are using non sequiturs. They are having illogical and irrational conversation. For example, when Ross asks, "What is the matter with you today?" Gil replies, "When." How can what be answered with when? That is not a proper answer. Yet, this signifies that most of the time ordinary human conversations also are illogical, irrational, although human beings think that their conversations are filled with so much of meaning. Dialogues in the play symbolize that human life is a game, and that's why the characters which we have in the play, they indulge in a word play. They play a linguistic game with each other. The rapid fire questions and answers create a sense of circular logic where one statement leads to another without resolution or clarity. Basically, non sequiturs are a recurrent motif in many of the absurdist plays, and by now you must have noticed that these non sequiturs occur in the plays of Samuel Beckett, Ionesco, Pinter, and many other absurdist playwrights. Let us discuss another important non sequitur from the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. This non sequitur or word play tells us why Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are there. What are they doing there? Who has sent him? If you remember the story of Shakespeare's play Hamlet, you would recall that in the original play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were sent by Claudius to find out what is happening in the mind of Hamlet. In fact, in the original play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are spies whose purpose is to find out whether the transformation of Hamlet into a mad person is real or feigned, whether Hamlet's madness is real or feigned. Let us examine this conversation to find out what this play has to offer about Hamlet's madness. Ross says, Hamlet is not himself or outside or in. We have to glean what afflicts him. Gil says he does not give much away. Player says, who does away nowadays? Gil says he is melancholy. Player says melancholy. Ross says mad. Player says, how is he mad? Ross says, how is he mad? Gil says more morose than mad perhaps. Player says melancholy. Gil says moody. Ross says he has moods. Player says of moroseness. Gil says of madness, and yet Ross says quiet. Gil says for instance. Ross says he talks to himself, which might be madness. Gil says if he did not talk sense, which he does. Ross says which suggests the opposite. Gil says I think I have it. A man talking sense to himself is no madder than a man talking nonsense not to himself, or just mad, or just as mad meaning. Although Rosencrantz and Guildenstern have been appointed by Claudius to find out whether Hamlet's madness is real or feigned, they are helpless. Hamlet has outwitted them. They cannot know what is truly happening inside the mind of Hamlet. Sometimes they suggest that Hamlet is mad. There are other moments when they suggest that Hamlet is suffering from melancholia. There is another moment in the play where they suggest Hamlet is afflicted by mood swings. Now, what is Hamlet truly suffering from? Whether he is melancholic or mad, or he is experiencing mood swings. In fact, they also debate what is madness. Madness, they suggest, is a moment when a man talks to himself. But can that be called madness? Guildenstern says a man talking sense to himself is no madder than a man talking nonsense not to himself. What Guildenstern is saying? Guildenstern is saying that most of the human beings, most of the time, are talking nonsense to others. And therefore, it is better to talk sense to oneself instead of talking nonsense to others. So if Hamlet is talking sense to himself, like he does in the original play where he debates to be or not to be, that is the question. When he is meditating upon the futility of life, futility of existence. Don't you think so? What Hamlet is talking sense, even if he is talking to himself. And don't you think so? Compared to Hamlet's monologues, Most of the conversations or dialogues of other human beings are filled with nonsense. So who is really mad? An individual is mad or society is mad? Hamlet is mad or Claudius, Gertrude, Polonius and other people are mad? That becomes a very important question. You would also remember that Shakespeare's Hamlet was not only a play about madness, it was also a play about death. In the play, almost all characters except Fortinbras and Horatio die. We see the death of King Hamlet, Gertrude, Claudius, Polonius, Laertes, Ophelia, and of course of Hamlet. Like Shakespeare's Hamlet, death is also the theme of the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern by Tom Stoppard. Basically, the two characters, they are debating on what is the nature of death, whether they should fear death or not, and even if one fears death, whether that has any meaning or not. In the play, Ross says we cannot afford it. Gill says yes, one must think of the future. It is a normal thing. Gill says to have one. One is after all having it all the time, now and now. Ross says it could go on forever. Well, not forever, I suppose. Do you ever think of yourself as actually dead, lying in a box with a lid on it? Gill says no. Ross says nor do I really. It is silly to be depressed by it. I mean, one thinks of it like being alive in a box. One keeps forgetting to take into account the fact that one is dead. We should make a difference, should not it? I mean, you would never know you were in a box, would you? It would be just like being asleep in a box. Not that I would like to sleep in a box, mind you, not without any air. You would wake up dead for a start, and then where would you be apart from inside a box? That is the bit I don't like, frankly. That's why I don't think of it. Because you would be helpless, wouldn't you? Stuffed in a box like that. I mean, you would be in there forever, even taking into account the fact that you are dead. Really? Ask yourself. If I ask you straight off, I am going to stuff you in this box now, would you rather be alive or dead? Naturally, you would prefer to be alive. Life in a box is better than no life at all. When Gill suggests to Ross that one should think of future, Ross confronts him by saying, if a human being will think of future, then he or she has to confront the idea of death also. Death which is threatening, with death which is scary. Ross compares death to a man sleeping inside a box with a lid on it. It has a deeper symbolical meaning. Ross suggests that death is like being asleep in a box. There is no difference between death and sleep. Although death is the longest sleep one can have, there is no coming back, there is no return. If one dies, one has to sleep till eternity. However, death is not to be desired. Death is not to be preferred. As Ross rightly says, life in a box is better than no life at all. Life is more meaningful compared to death. Guildenstern continues his discussion of death with the player. In the play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, who are there to perform a play within this play. Here you should remember that there are three plays in this play. Of course, Shakespeare's Hamlet is in the background, and the two characters, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, are derived from Shakespeare's Hamlet. Of course, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead is a play itself. And of course, within this play, we have another play which is to be performed by the players. So, we have three layers of performances in this play. Now, let us re-examine how Guildenstern and the player philosophize about death. Guildenstern says, what do you know about death? Player says, it is what the actors do best. They have to exploit whatever talent is given to them, and their talent is dying. They can die heroically, comically, ironically, slowly, suddenly, disgustingly, charmingly, from a great height. My own talent is more general. Guildenstern says actors, the mechanics of cheap melodrama, that's not death. You scream and choke and sink to your knees, but it does not bring death home to anyone. It does not catch them unawares and start the whisper in their skull and says, one day you are going to die. You die so many times, how can you expect them to believe in your death? Player says, on the contrary, it is the only kind they do believe. They are conditioned to it. I had an actor once who was condemned to hang for stealing a sheep or a lamb. I forget which, so I got permission to have him hanged in the middle of a play, had to change the plot a bit, but I thought it would be effective. You know, and you would not believe it, he was not convincing. It was impossible to suspend one's disbelief, and what with audience jeering and throwing peanuts, the whole thing was a disaster. He did nothing but cry all the time, right out of character, just stood there and cried never again. Guildenstern says, no, 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 you have got it all wrong. You cannot act death. The fact of it is nothing to do with seeing it happen. It is not gasps and blood and falling about. This is not what makes it death. It is just a man failing to reappear. That's all. Now you see him. Now you don't. And that is the only thing that is real. Here 1 minute and gone the next, and never coming back. An exit. Unobtrusive. Unannounced. A disappearance gathering weight as it goes on until finally it is heavy with death. This conversation is a very interesting conversation on death. It asks, what is death? And whether death can be performed on the stage or not. Of course, the player says that death can be performed and one can die heroically, comically, disgustingly, slowly, suddenly. There are 1,000 ways of dying. It reminds us how differently human beings die. No human being dies in the same similar fashion. Heroes die heroic deaths. Clown die clownish deaths. Cowards die cowardly deaths. Evil people, villainous people, they die a disgusting death. Death arouses distinct and different emotions. But can death be reduced to performance? Is death merely acting? Is death merely a playing out? Of course, Guildenstern does not agree with this estimation of death. For Guildenstern, death is absence. You are in this world, all of a sudden you disappear. You go somewhere else and you never return. That's what death is. In fact, this idea echoes Sartrean idea of death, where death is just the absence of a man from this world. Imagine for a while that I am here and then I disappear all of a sudden, never to reappear, never to return. Don't you think so? I am dead. Don't you think so? I am dead at least for you. And that's why, like Sartre, Tom Stoppard also seems to suggest that death is just the absence of man from this earth. Real death is not screaming. Real death is not choking. Real death is not falling. It's not a performance. Real death, Guildenstern says, is just a man failing to reappear. Now you see him and now you don't. That is the only thing that is real. It is an exit, unobtrusive, unannounced, a sudden disappearance for never to return. As the play progresses, you come to know that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are supposed to take Hamlet to England, where Claudius has arranged that Hamlet will be killed. You remember in the original play by Shakespeare, the ship of Hamlet and Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is attacked by pirates. The letter which was written by Claudius for the English king was found by Hamlet, and he ensures that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are killed. Something similar happens in the play as well. Hamlet changes the content of the letter, although Rosencrantz and Guildenstern find out what is the content of the letter and they start thinking about death once again. Ross says, we have a letter. Guildenstern says, a letter? Yes, that's true. That's something, a letter. And what is written in the letter? As England is Denmark's faithful tributary, as love between them like the palm might flourish, etc., etc., that on the knowing of this contents without delay of any kind should those bearers, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, put to sudden death. Why should Rosencrantz and Guildenstern be killed? What have they done? Have they done something wrong? Have they done something criminal? They did not even know the content of the letter. However, now they are awaiting their death. Whether they should proceed towards England and die or not, that becomes a hovering question for them. Instead of trying to avoid their death, they philosophically muse upon death. They say, so there is an end to that. It's commonplace. Light goes with life, and in the winter of your years, the dark comes. Guildenstern says, no, no, not for us, not like that. Dying is not romantic. Death is not a game which will soon be over. Death is not anything. Death is not. It is the absence of presence, nothing more. The endless time of never coming back. A gap you cannot see, and when the wind blows through it and makes sound. Both of them suggest that death is void. Death is as meaningless as life is. Death, they say, is the absence of the presence. Death is eternity, and there is no possibility of return after death. They cannot understand the absurdity of situation. They know they have not committed anything wrong, yet they are going to die. Like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, all human beings also think, why are they going to die? What crime have they done? They fail to understand that death and dying are natural outcomes of human life. At the end of the play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern just disappear from the stage, echoing the philosophy they have been propounding, that death is merely the absence of man from the stage of life. Now the question that comes before us is what this play is all about. Stoppard's play is about this conflict between fate and free will. Whether human beings are free to live their lives on their own or their lives are controlled by some external force. That force may be God, or that force may be fate, that force may be chance, it may be anything. Tom Stoppard in the play echoes the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, about whom we have already discussed. Schopenhauer has written, man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. It's a very interesting proposition. Man has freedom, but his freedom is limited. Man can do what he desires, man can perform what he wills, but the problem with man is that man has no freedom to desire what he desires. There is no freedom of will that man has. His freedom to will is controlled by supernatural or extranatural forces which are beyond human control. Something similar has been echoed by another famous English writer, G.K. Chesterton, who says, according to most philosophers, God in making the world enslaved it. According to Christianity, in making it, he set it free. God had written not so much a poem, but rather a play he had planned as perfect, but which had necessarily been left to human actors and stage managers who had since made a great mess of it. Chesterton is also suggesting that man is both free and bound. Free because he has been given free will, but bound because there are forces beyond man which control his fate. Perhaps this also exemplifies Sartrean dictum, where Sartre says man is condemned to be free. Talking about this conflict between fate and free will, Tom Stoppard writes in the play, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead. Wheels have been set in motion, and they have their own pace to which we are condemned. Each move is dictated by the previous one. That is the meaning of order. If we start being arbitrary, it will just be a shambles. At least let us hope so. Because if we just happened to discover or even suspect that our spontaneity was part of their order, we would know that we were lost. Tom Stoppard suggests that there is some order which sets things and human lives in motion. Each move of a man is regulated by the previous move he has already made. And that's why in his life, although he considers himself to be free, but finds out himself to be helpless victim of external forces. If you look at the conversation between Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, you will be better able to understand the idea Tom Stoppard wants to propose. If you take into account the conversation between Guildenstern and the player, you will be better able to understand the conflict between fate and free will. Guildenstern says, "Where are you going?" Player says, "Halt." "Home, sir." Guildenstern, "Where from?" Player says, "Home." We are traveling people. We take our chances where we find them. Guildenstern says, "It was a chance then." Player says, "Chance." Guildenstern, "You found us." Player says, "Oh yes." Guildenstern says, "You were looking." Player says, "Oh no." Guildenstern says, "Chance then." Player says, "Or fate." Guildenstern says, "Yours or ours?" Player says, "It could hardly be one without the other." Guildenstern says, "Fate then." Player says, "Oh yes, we have no control." Player's remarks are profound. Player is suggesting that all human beings on this earth are in exile. They are travelers, and wherever they go, there is their home. They are bound by God or by some other force, which can also be fate, and therefore whatever happens to man in his or her life is just a matter of chance. Human beings may call it fate, human beings may call it divine will, human beings may call it whatever name they want to, yet human beings will have to understand that they are bound by some fate which has tied them to whatever happens to them in their lives. Human beings have to understand that they have no control over their own lives. They have to understand that their free will is limited. And therefore, this play by Tom Stoppard appears to be deterministic. Like other absurdist plays, this play by Tom Stoppard is also a meditation upon memory and forgetting. In the play, Ross says, "I have not forgotten how I used to remember my own name and yours. Oh, I have not forgotten how I used to remember my own name and yours. Oh yes, there were answers everywhere and you looked. There was no question about it. People knew it who I was, and if they did not, they asked me and I told them." Guildenstern says, "You did. The trouble is each of them is plausible without being instinctive. All your life you live so close to truth, it becomes a permanent blur in the corner of your eye. And when something nudges it into outline, it is like being ambushed by a grotesque." A man standing in his saddle in the half-lit, half-live dawn banged on the shutters and called two names. He was just a hat and the cloak, levitating in the grey plume of his own breath. But when he called, we came. That much is certain, we came. Ross says, "Well, I can tell you, I am sick to death of it. I don't care one way or another, so why don't you make up your mind?" Guildenstern says, "We cannot afford anything quite so arbitrary, nor did we come all this way for a christening, all that preceded us. But we are comparatively fortunate. We might have been left to sift the whole field of human nomenclature, like two blind men looting a bazaar for their own portraits. At least we are presented with alternatives." If you have read the play, you would remember that there is a moment in the play when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, they don't remember even their names. What is its significance? Tom Stoppard emphasized heavily on the unreliability of memory. He suggested that in the absence of any reliable memory, human beings, in the absence of memory, realize that there is no substance called life. When we are born on this earth, there is nothing from the past life that we carry. and after we die, there is nothing which we carry forward from this life. And therefore, it's better for human beings to forget what they have been doing every day. It is essential because unless human beings forget the banality of everyday actions, everyday lives, they cannot be happy. From our discussion, it would be quite apparent to you that the play Rosencrantz and Guildenstern is a meta-theatrical experiment by Tom Stoppard. Meta-theater is a self-conscious theater. It draws attention to their own nature as theater. It is marked by self-referentiality, and it often has a play within play, like it happens in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, where the players are going to perform the murder of Gonzago like Shakespeare's Hamlet. The play is also an intertextual parody of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Intertextuality can be defined as a tissue of quotations drawn from innumerable sources of culture. Roland Barthes has rightly suggested that a text is nothing but a tissue of quotations. Within one text, you have several other texts. Similarly, in the play, we have Shakespeare's Hamlet as an intertext. This play is a parodic intertextual experiment by Tom Stoppard. We'll discuss more about Tom Stoppard in our next class. Thank you very much.